Now, I'm going to have to be very careful with the Shōkaku class. I truly am. Because they're coming out before I do the deep dive into Japanese naval aviation doctrine and its development and evolution and what it is and what it's about. That's coming up later in, well, I think it's in July, if we quickly skip through here. Yes, it is. It's in June, though. I thought it was July. Oh, happy days. No, that's the Imperial Japanese Naval Aviation Squadron Aircraft System. The Imperial Japanese Naval Aviation Doctrine is the 30th of July. Phew. So that's coming then. Okay? The problem I have with talking about the Shōkaku class, when I've chosen to talk about the Shōkaku class, because it fits within the discussion of carriers to talk about the Shōkaku class now, is they are truly the final pre-war expression of Japanese naval aviation doctrine as it exists in the 20s and 30s being let to run rampant. They are the fullest example of this. And that makes them really cool. It makes them truly interesting vessels. It also means that I'm going to be at the risk of repeating myself with some of this discussion. And giving away some of the tidbits of what's going to be coming up. So this is going to be a very, very fine line for me to row. I'm going to have to steer incredibly close. Incredibly close. But hopefully I can make it through. Now, the thing you have to think about this class is that there is more random stuff written about them than pretty much any other class of aircraft carrier I can think of. I mean, even the Graf Zeppelin doesn't have quite as much strange stuff written about them. And I don't know quite why that is. I have theories, but most of my theories come back to people not actually bothering to look at the class and just putting their own image on it, not actually doing the research on it. And that's a shame, because these two aircraft carriers are probably some of the best designed aircraft carriers built in their period. They are certainly full of lessons to learn from. Now, when I say that, do I say that these carriers would be perfect for the Royal Navy? No. Would they fit the US Navy? Not really. Doctrine-wise, though, these are perfect for the Imperial Japanese Navy. And here is the scary thing, which I have to say in so many videos where I discuss doctrine. Doctrine is right or wrong, depending on how well it serves the nation it is for. Now, doctrine reflects the geostrategic realities of that nation, and no matter how good a doctrine is, it cannot make up for a nation's geostrategic limitations. So, when I see people going, well, these carriers must have been bad because Japanese doctrine must have been bad because they lost World War II, I'm sorry. But I'm not quite sure which of the logical fallacies that falls most under. I kind of like post hoc ergo propter hoc for it, but it's not quite after therefore because of. There is another one called argumentum ad logicam, or the argument from fallacy, or argument to logic, and basically that has the general form that if P, then Q. P is a fallacious statement, therefore Q is false. So, you know, the phrase that's often used, and this is a great one, which is one of the most common ones used, and it's not just in books, it's on Wikipedia. Someone says, I speak English, therefore I'm English. That's not true. But it's not quite, doesn't quite fit that either. In fact, when you go down the list of fallacies, which I tend to have around me because for a historian, you come across them a lot. Usually the example I give is, someone has idea. They go to history to find evidence to prove idea. That will usually produce something which is logically false, because they will cherry pick the parts of history which back up that idea, and not look at the whole of history. Whereas, realistically, when you want to get a lesson from history, you should go and read the history, look in the context, look at the continuity, and then try and work out what it is saying, what the history is teaching you. So, on the arguments, therefore, on a spectrum of, were these the best aircraft carriers in World War II? No. Were they the worst aircraft carriers in World War II? No. Were they the best doctrinal design carriers for the Japanese doctrine? Yes. Is the Japanese doctrine bad? No. It is a doctrine based in their own limitations. And I know there is going to be at least someone who's going to go, well, their doctrine was the Kantai-Kessen. No. The decisive battle doctrine, or rather the decisive battle theory, scenario, is part of their doctrine. But it is not the only part of their doctrine. It is part of a whole spectrum of doctrines. And this is something I'll be going into in the Japanese Naval Aviation Doctrine video. And that's going to be a fun video for me to go through. But the point is, Japanese doctrine does not fall down on one thing, just like British doctrine doesn't fall down on one thing, and American doctrine doesn't fall down on one thing. When people take the Japanese doctrine and go, it's the Kantai-Kessen, it's decisive battle, it'd be the same thing as going to, I don't know, which part of the American doctrine is the most forgotten, but also most interestingly annoying part. Ooh. The battle line doctrine. Because at one point, the entire US Navy theory was that you have the carriers operating in task forces wandering around, and the battle fleet steaming as a battle line towards the enemy. So you could argue that all of the American doctrine was about getting that battle line to the enemy. And that's all they're focused on. It's not. It's a gross oversimplification to say so. But it's the same when you when you drop the Japanese doctrine down to the Kantai-Kessen. And it's the same when you go to the Royal Navy and go, they have an ambush doctrine. And they're all about ambushing their enemies. And people go, some people might go, what are you talking about when you're talking about ambush doctrine? Long-range night strikes by aircraft and the fact that they are obsessed with how many torpedoes their submarines can fire in a salvo. That's where you see the ambush doctrine really come through. The Royal Navy have a whole legacy of working at ambush doctrine and mine laying, rapid mine layers, so they can put mines in narrow passages and fill them up and cause them to be blockaded. The whole idea was you would have mines, and then you'd have submarines backing up with their ability to fire, like the T-class, 10 torpedoes, and so anyone trying to come through a narrow channel to get into the South China Sea or approach Singapore would run into an Amdeel-class laid minefield, and then a couple of T-boats, who would make them very sorry for having tried to go through that. They probably could make it through if they're pushing the whole fleet through, because they're going to overwhelm those resources, but they're going to lose ships doing it. It's going to be painful. But that, just like the whole night fighting doctrine of getting close enough, waiting till the enemy's guns start to turn to fire at night, getting as close as you can until they start turning their guns. That's not the whole of British doctrine. That's not the whole of the British development of aviation, as I discussed in the Naval Aviation Doctrine video. And it's So this is the point when we're talking about the Japanese doctrine and when we're talking about their carriers. So these ships, the Shōkakus, are an expression of their doctrine. They're an expression of lots of different facets of that doctrine. And yes, one of those facets is the Kantai Kessen. But the fact is, the Shōkakus are also, I would say, as much to do as Yugeki Zengen Sankusen, their interception and attrition operations doctrine, and I would even say the Taikan Kyo Shugi, which is their big ships, big guns doctrine, which people often say is, no, hang on, it's called big ships, big gun doctrine. Surely that's just applied to battleships. No. The Japanese apply it the whole way down. The biggest gun a ship can carry, the biggest ship they can build. So it's the biggest statement of power, of might, and the biggest deployer of strength. And what's the biggest gun a carrier can carry? It's the size of its air group. So the bigger the gun, the bigger the ship. So this is where we come in, and this is one of the reasons why this video is delayed today, is I want to get this part right. Before we get into this, I want to get this part right. So yes, there is a lot of discussion of Japanese naval aviation doctrine coming. But these ships, their ability is an expression of that doctrine. And believe it or not, I think I've managed to already row that line quite well without crossing into the level of depth I'm planning on doing in the forthcoming video. And probably have already made a few commentators very upset, because there is, just as there are people out there who believe the Bern was the most beautiful aircraft carrier ever built, and there are people who believe the Graf Zeppelin was not absolutely shackled by the German Design Bureau's committee approach, where they're chucking in so many different ideas and they're going to see which works, that they are making a horribly experimental ship that they're going to try use operational. There are people who believe, quite literally, that the Japanese only had one doctrine and one facet to their doctrine, and that was the Kantai Kessen, and everything's about that. It's not. The fact is, the Kantai Kessen, and I've said this before and I'll say this many times again, is the end point of their doctrine. That is the decisive battle which is supposed to take place within range of Japan, within support, easy fleet range of Japan, so they can deploy as much of the fleet as possible. They don't hold anything back. Everything's supposed to be sent. And it's supposed to be after the enemy has already been attrited, either by logistical issues and distance, i.e. what happened to the Russian fleet before Tsushima, thanks to sailing all around the world. The 2nd and 3rd Pacific squadrons kind of got beaten up by the oceans, and the British making sure they couldn't get access to decent coal. And, well, the Japanese version for dealing with the Americans was, they're not going to have that problem coming across the Pacific, so we better trick them in other ways. And the whole point of having the decisive battle is it's once you've attrited the enemy to a point at which you can have a decisive battle. Again, their doctrine realizes that they are going to be facing someone larger and bigger than them. So, with that all said, shameless book plug. Now, I do this in pretty much every single video. Usually it's the second slide in. But I waited a bit today because I needed to get that all out the way, because this gives people then a chance. If they don't want to watch the rest of this, if they're already yelling at the screen, no, it's all the Kantai Kessen! You imbecile! It's all the Kantai Kessen! Save your blood pressure now. Go. Go. There'll be no hard feelings on my part, and I hope none on yours. We won't agree. I've done my research. You, I'm sure, have done your research. You are confident in your beliefs, happy with them. Don't stress yourself out. Don't give yourself blood pressure issues. Go. Have a nice evening. have some milk and cookies. I don't drink alcohol, so I'm not going to tell people to go to a bar or anything like that, am I? It's be kind of false advertising. I have no idea what that kind of fun that would be. But when I go to bars, I just drink Coke. A cola, by the way. So that's not really the same experience. Unless there's a dartboard and people drunkenly challenge the sober guy to playing darts. That's always fun. Pays for my night out. Anyway, Troubles, Battles and Darings. I'm a naval historian. I'm an academic. And I like being an academic. I like teaching in universities. I like the chance to help students discover their way into history and have the skills to go and do the research and find out the things they want to find out. And those skills can turn into very useful assets in the employment field. They truly can. The skills of a historian to be able to go and research and take words written in one way and turn them into English, which can be understood by lots of other people, or communicative phraseologies that can be understood by a wider number of people. That's a great asset to have. There is a reason why history students tend to have very little trouble getting recruited by companies if they're prepared to go that route and want to go that route. There is a reason. But in the UK, for you to get promoted, for you to get a permanent post, you need to sell a lot of books. Basically, everything's based on your books. Books and journal articles. So, yeah. I do shameless book plugs. And at the moment, I only have Troubles, Battles, Darings, which is on its 2nd edition, thanks to everyone buying copies. But, you know, I'd like it to be on its 3rd edition, and there are more books coming out soon. And also, thank everyone who likes, shares, and subscribes to the videos. It's always cool to grow the channel. It really does. It allows me to spread the love of naval history, which, as I've said many times before, but is my favourite joke on this. Naval history, loving it might not be a communicable disease, but I do my best to communicate it to everyone. I really do. So, here's an outline for the Shōkakus. And I've actually done something which I rarely do, but I've gone through some of the popular phraseology about these carriers, and I've just decided to go into the actual reality. So, here we go. Their requirement was apparently to have as close to the aircraft capacity of Akagi and Kaga as possible. Akagi had 66 aircraft plus 25 reserve. Kaga, 90 aircraft, 72 plus 18 in storage, as of the 1936 design. And their air groups of December 1941 are there. Shōkaku, 72 plus 12 spares. Which is 18 zeros, 27 Aki D3 Vals, and 27 Nakajima B5N Kates. They wanted to have the speed of Hiryu. Well, Hiryu's got 34 knots of speed, Shōkaku's 34.5 knots. That's good. The defensive armament of Kaga. Well, Kaga's armament was 10 single 200mm guns, 8 twin 127mm guns, and 11 twin Type 96 25mm AA guns. So that's 22 of those, and a 6-inch belt and a 1.5-inch deck. Shōkaku, well, she has 8 twin 127mm dual-purpose guns. That's the 5-inch guns. 12 triple 25mm AA guns. So 36 of those. And armor, well, that varies between 1.8 and 6.5 inches. And deck armor between 2.6 and 5.2 inches. So, yeah, I'd say she fits that quite well. What I laugh is sometimes it's written as they were supposed to aiming for 96 aircraft, like the other aircraft had. And I've seen books which write that. And I go, the other carriers did not have 96 aircraft. Akagi has 91. Kaga has 90. Shōkaku has 84. That's perfectly fine. They've got 72 operational aircraft. That's, again, perfectly fine for what they're required to do. What are they required to do to fit in the group? Well, again, the Japanese doctrine was that these carriers could be used for defense and offense. They were supposed to be able to switch easily between the two. They were supposed to be able to do reconnaissance and strike. They were supposed to be doing... They had specific reconnaissance vessels, but they did also have the carriers would be doing taking part in it as well. They had to be able to provide a consistent operation, and more importantly, they had to maintain a tempo of operations while dealing with a level of attrition of aircraft and pilots, and still sustain that operations over a period. Remember, the lovely attrition operations, or as they're called, and I'm going to keep saying this, Yugeki Zengen Sakusen. Yes, the interception attrition operations, which are supposed to be attriting an enemy as it comes back. You do not want to have your carriers having to return to get replacement aircraft from Japan and then come out to launch strikes again. That's going to lose you valuable time in attriting your enemy. You want to attrit them. You want to be doing constant attacks and disappear, attacks and disappear, attacks and disappear. That's how you attrit your enemy. That's what they're planning on doing. So this carrier can do that. It's fast. 34.5 knots. Yeah, she's got the speed. Her and Hiryu. Yeah, they're gonna do that. They're gonna be able to rack up that speed position. She's got the air group size to it. She's got the size of the aircraft. The same air group numbers, pretty much the same aircraft numbers. She has the strike strength of Kaga. I would say she's slightly lower on the fighter strength of the two of them, but she's still got 18 zeros. That's still fine design. There's two of them up there. 18 is the minimum number of fighters, as the Royal Navy will tell you. They did a lot of maths to work that one out. So did the Japanese. They did a lot of maths, a lot of exercises to work out what was the minimum number of fighters they need. And if you're carrying 12 spare aircraft and you've got 18, 27, and 27, then you could well go for 4, 4, and 4 spare aircraft. You could. You might not, but you could. And armor-wise, a better armor fit than Kaga had. That's good, useful, and still going a lot faster. And all she's lost is the 200mm guns. I don't think it's a problem. By that point, let's be honest, she's exchanging speed and air power and air defense firepower for ability to deal with cruisers on her own, which you never really had. Doesn't matter if you're Lexington, doesn't matter if you're HMS Eagle, doesn't matter which of the frigating carriers you are, which are fitted with these big guns, you cannot deal with a cruiser on your own because you have cruiser-grade guns. Because you are a massive target which has a lot of fuel and flammable materials high up in you, and you are going to find yourself against a cruiser. No, you run. And you scream for other cruisers to be around you. And if there aren't other cruisers around you, why were you in that position in the first place? Why do you allow yourself to get into that position? Before someone points out, well, what about HMS Glorious? Yeah. That was the Royal Navy going against its own doctrine. There are a list of senior officers who I will blame for that. Quite happily. Because even the Royal Navy's post-action analysis basically spends its time going, why was this carrier doing this? This is not our doctrine. This is not our policy. Why the frigate was this happening? Because even the peacetime escorts of their carriers were more than 2 frigating destroyers. Even in peacetime, when they were just transiting between safe port to safe port, they would have a larger escort than that. Sometimes it's not labelled escort. Sometimes they're just going in the same way, but they would still be there. So why the friggin' in wartime does that happen? The Japanese are nowhere near that going to let that happen, because for the Japanese, one of the key points of their approach to naval aviation is it is a key capability for them to offset the larger strength and strategic advantage of the American Navy and the Royal Navy, i.e. of the US Navy and the Royal Navy, in terms of infrastructure and size of fleet. Both those fleets can bring considerably more assets to the table. Your only ability to beat them is to be able to offset them by attacking in a way they cannot manage to defend against and knocking those assets off the table to attrit them to a level at which they are of equal capability to yourself. So the trick is you have to attrit them without allowing yourself to be attrited. And that is what the Shōkakus are about. That is what they are for. They are for attritting the enemy. And preferably surviving attempts to attrit them. Now, that doesn't necessarily always work. In fact, it's more often not going to work. Because the enemy gets a vote. But this is the thing about Doctrine. You will have layers of it. You'll have, this is our perfect scenario where everything goes right and all our dreams and fairies and unicorns appear. But then you'll have the graduations of Doctrine as, this is what happens if this happens. If this happens, if some orcs appear, if gremlins appear, if not everything goes to plan, this is what we do then. Now, I have to say, Mark Beatty, he is definitely on the side of these being some of the best carriers ever built. And again, arguably the best carriers in the world, definitely for the Japanese Doctrine. There are certain things I wouldn't like to do with them from the American Doctrine, and there are certain things I would not like to do with them from the British Doctrine. But they are very good carriers, and as completed, they are powerful statements. They are powerful statements. Now, personally, would I prefer their stacks to go up rather than out to the side? Yeah, but that's the Japanese design pattern at this point. Do I feel the island's a little bit far forward? Yeah, but I can also understand why it's positioning. It's shaped the way it is. Should they maybe have a full-length flight deck to go the full length and, right up to over the bows? Well, that would give them a little bit extra space, but let's be honest, that's not going to be much. They're big and capable vessels as it is. Their overall length is 257.5 meters, or 844 foot 10 inches. Their beam's 29 meters, that's 95 foot 2 inches. And their draft, 9.32 meters, which is 30 foot 7 inches. Pretty much in deep load, but yeah, they can be interesting. They can be interesting. And they've got 160,000 shaft horsepower, thanks to 8 very good boilers, supplying 4 geared steam turbines, driving 4 shells. And as I said, you've got 34.5 knots of your top speed, but you've also got 9,700 nautical miles. That's 18,000 kilometers at 18 knots. And all that's for 32,000 tons, pretty much, deep load. That's good. This is a well-designed vessel. This is a vessel which is building upon years of investment and development of naval aviation, of aircraft carriers. Of all the mistakes they've made, and the Japanese did make mistakes, but they learnt from them. This is a quality carrier. And yes, they're not necessarily going to have the best ends, but today's video is not about their ends. It's about them and their doctrine. It's about their role in the development of aviation. And frankly, the Shōkakus get forgotten by a lot of people when it comes to aviation development. There's a lot about them which ends up having to be relearnt. A lot of their lessons are put to one side because they're Japanese. And that assumption, as I talked about at the beginning, that the Japanese must have had bad doctrine because they lost the war, and therefore anything which was a fruit of that doctrine must also be bad. It doesn't work like that. You could have the greatest doctrine in the world. That's going to not make up for the fact that your opponent has got just as good a doctrine and has got 20-to-1 odds in their favour in terms of numbers. That's not going to make up. The Japanese build handfuls of carriers. The Americans build reams of them. The British, well, certainly if they'd been at war with Japan and it hadn't started off with Germany and Italy, and they carried on with the construction programs they had on paper and started out the full light fleet carrier program, which they were sort of working towards, and other things, could have also built reams of carriers. As many as the Americans? Probably not, but still enough that frankly it would still have been an ocean of carriers as far as the Japanese would have been concerned fighting them. So, the fact is the Japanese composed their doctrine, they designed their ships from that doctrine, knowing this. They know that's what's going to be coming their way. So, if you cannot recourse to numbers, what do you recourse to? Quality. Whilst quantity is a quality in of its own, quality is a quantity of its own. And it's the quantity versus, it's a cumulative thing between the quality and the quantity, which creates your value. Some people recourse to quantity, some to quality. But everyone realistically is on the spectrum in terms of their value, which is the combination of the quality they are and the quantity they are. If you can't go for quantity, you go for quality. And I keep flipping them around, don't I? But hopefully I made the point, despite my hands keep flipping around which way was which. They are a necessity for Pearl Harbor. You literally cannot launch Pearl Harbor without Shōkaku and Zukaku. You cannot. It's just not possible. This is why I put in the 7th Air Group in there, because you cannot launch that operation without those carriers. You do not have enough strength. You do not have enough viability to do so. You launch Pearl Harbor with 4 carriers, or you take the other vessels they have, let's say Hosho and Ryojo. You do not have enough firepower. You do not have enough flexibility. Realistically, you can take Kaga out of that group, and they can still launch Pearl Harbor. It's not got the same air strength, but you can do that. It's a lot faster group. You can use Soryu and Hiryu, Shōkaku and Zukaku, and probably launch a decent strike. But you take any of the 4 newer carriers out of that strike and you have problems. You take 2 of them out of that strike and it isn't happening. The conversions are great ships, but they're conversions. They've got limitations. They certainly aren't able to arraign aircraft on their deck as quickly, as capably. They certainly aren't able to carry the same volume in terms of what they can quickly maneuver into operation. And yes, we're not talking about a massive difference. This is the trouble. People sometimes sit there and go, well, yeah, you're talking about minutes of difference, maximum overall of launching all the air group. because of the different seconds of how the lifts operate. You know, why does that matter? Why does it matter? Because when you're dealing with aircraft and strike capabilities, which we're talking about hundreds of miles per hour, minutes equate to distance. Minutes equate to when your strike arrives. Minutes equate to when your defense is airborne. Minutes equate to vulnerability of your aircraft, of your carrier. Time equates to everything when you're an aircraft carrier. The interesting question really for me when it comes to the Shōkakus is what compromises were there in the design? Because there are compromises. You see, I've talked about how they're a reflection of doctrine, how they can carry the required air group, they have the required defensive firepower, they have the required defensive armor, they have the speed. But there are still compromises. They are not quite, in terms of carrier capabilities, for Japan, a full expression of Taikan Kyoshugi, or the big ships, big guns. Not quite the biggest they could have built, because let's be honest, you can tell they could have built something bigger, because there's Yamato class. The Yamato class. And on that note, there is an interesting discussion going to be coming up in, I think, Scuttlebutt possibly too, maybe Scuttlebutt 3, where someone asked me why Yamamoto and Yamamoto sounds so similar. Because I tend to pronounce Yamamoto very quickly. So Yamamoto becomes Yamamoto, and Yamamoto is Yamamoto, and therefore the is not quite heard. And sometimes also I do confuse the two because of the joys of dyslexia and don't notice it. Because I know when I'm listening through, I'm wondering, going, is that one or that one? Because I confuse myself with the speed I pronounce Yamamoto. It's something I've got to try and train myself out of. But interestingly enough, him and Yanai, Mitsumasa Yanai, who are the two senior officers who have the most to do with the design of and the specifications of the Soryu, Hiryu, Shōkaku, and Tsukaku. Seriously, in terms of aviation and carrier development, those two really do push and really do impact on the carrier designs. Interesting enough, both of them are to an extent pulling some of their punches with this class. And I think it's to get them ready when in the time period they do, because they need them for 1941. The Japanese know they've got a period of risk coming. They really do. And there is a large discussion going on in Japan about how to approach it. How to deal with it. And it's complicated by the various internal factions. And I've been having a lot of discussions about this recently. You know, you have, well, it can be summed up realistically in two statements. It can be summed up in two statements. And one of those is, Japan is fully prepared to take appropriate steps in the event that the United States continues its suppression. And we might win the first battle for Japan, but we won't win the second. The war is lost to us, therefore we must forget about face. We must surrender as quickly as we can. We must begin to consider at once how best to preserve our country. Both those statements come from Mitsumasa Yanai. You see, for Japan, they had to project strength. Their only chance to survive was to project strength. But at a certain point, projecting strength, your bluff is called. And either you have the strength to back it up, or you don't. And that bluff can be called by your domestic as well as your foreign politics. Your international relations and your internal dissent. In many ways, we can see the start of World War II in the Pacific and the Japanese attack. Well, in terms of China, you can of course point out it starts earlier. The Second Sino-Japanese War starts in a lot earlier. But in terms of the American involvement and direct involvement in fighting the Japanese, it starts with Pearl Harbor. And, as said, these ships are important for that. These are part of the timeline. Well, you have a problem. Either Japan goes down the route of keep doing what it's doing and slowly finding itself getting economically crushed by the Americans and losing because of that, or they go down swinging. And the really interesting thing is that for many, the view is that they might win the first battle, they will not win the second. And they understand that. But for others, it's a case of we have to fight because we have no chance if we don't. Because their view of the world is important enough to them that they will not abandon it. They will not change their worldview. These carriers are part of that discussion. These carriers are part of that discussion in a way that the Hio class, which comes after them, just aren't. They are conversions. They're originally luxury liners, and they are converted to carriers from 1941. They are definitely not aircraft carriers designed for operations. They are conversions. Then there's the Taiho, which is a modified Shōkaku in so many ways. But let's be honest, what does she get modified with? Well, her air group drops down. She loses an elevator over in contrast to Shōkaku's. She loses speed, dropping down by 1.2 knots. She can still do 18 knots but this is now for 10,000 nautical miles, so that's a little bit further. Her engines will take her a little bit further. But what she gained? Honestly? Some armor. She's lost guns. She's lost aircraft. She's gained an extra armored deck. She's gained extra thick armored decks. But she's in many ways a bit of a mess. And again, she'll get a video. She'll be part of a video discussing her at some point in the future. But the Shōkakus, the reason, all these other carriers are built after. They come after the Shōkakus. They are not part of this discussion. The Shōkakus, though, their construction, as fast as it was, as capable as it was, and it was quite fast. But in Japanese terms, it was quite fast. Shōkaku was laid down in December 1937. Shōkaku in May 1938. They're both launched in 1939, and they're completed in August and September 1941. Pretty much the timeline for Pearl Harbor is getting these carriers into service and worked up. It's also the timeline in many ways that some admirals and politicians in Japan had for trying to avert war. Because they, along with the Yamatos, were in many ways also an expression, as said, and as I've discussed and I've mentioned several times now, but I'm going to keep mentioning it because I find the best way to try and fight the Kantai Kessen is all their doctrine there is to keep talking about the other doctrines there are. Taikan Kyo Shugi. That's also their deterrence doctrine. Again, Taikan Kiyoshugi is about having such capable vessels, such big, powerful, capable vessels, that you don't have to fight. That people don't want to fight you, because they know they'll lose. It's a variation of the risk fleet theory, but it's a risk fleet theory which is not about building a fleet to match someone in a quantitative way, i.e. in quantity, which is a threat, but to match them in a qualitative way, because it's a far harder argument to make that case. We have to go with war with them because their ships are better than ours. But they have 2 of them, we have 8. What are you on? Doesn't work. They're trying to build up 8 ships to match our 8. That's threatening. They have 2 really great ships which are far better than our 8 ships individually. Yeah, but we have 8. And then when Pearl Harbor is enacted, well, I would say that's the beginning of the attrition strategy. That's what I often put Pearl Harbor down to. I think in many ways, under that circumstance, it was actually not successful enough because it didn't actually attrit enough to make a meaningful attrition, and definitely, therefore, cannot be defined as anything other. But it's also attrits too much in that the Americans, rather than being stung and charging across the Pacific in an emotional outburst and not maintaining sensible control of their forces, so not backing down when they start to lose ships, which is what you want to sting them into doing, because that's the only way that you're going to get them to string out their forces charging across the Pacific and be able to subject to attrition. You've done too much damage for them to be able to do that. Not enough damage to prevent them building up and coming back later. You've shot yourself in the foot. And ultimately, it's because you don't have enough forces. And can't have enough forces. Now, I know potentially that seemed a little bit of a rambling context. But the point is, it's about the nuance between the doctrine and the design and the ship's actual construction entrance into service. And there is no way really to do that neatly, because you've got to bring it all in when you're talking about it. You either try and ignore sections of it and just plow through in a straight line, or you have to wiggle all over the place. Or you have to go going, and now we're going back to the beginning, and we're going to start from here and work through in this section. So hopefully, I did it well. But I do realise that for some of the listeners, that was probably a little bit of a... Why is he zigzagging all over the place? Well, that's because you have to bring in all those factors, and it's a mess. Because it's humans, and we are naturally a mess. Just look at me moving house at this precise time behind me. So, during Pearl Harbor, what did they actually do? What did aircraft actually do? They provide the key capability for attacking the airfields. Now, this is chosen because their air groups haven't worked up enough. They don't want to use their air groups, even though they're the 5th Carrier Division and key part of the Kido Butai, the 1st Air Fleet, which literally only comes into existence that year. Even though that is the case, they haven't worked up enough for them to be used for the anti-shipping operations. So instead, they deploy them for the anti-airfield operations, and they attack Wheeler, they attack Hickam, they attack Ford Island, they attack Kano Bay. And that is what they're there for. And they do a very good job of that. Their pilots, their gunners, their Observers did a good job of what they were required to do. And suppression of the American airfields was a key part in the overall success of the strike. You can't do one without the other. If the Americans were able to launch fighters and launch aircraft in volume to interfere with the strikes going in, they would have had, the Japanese would have faced a lot more problems. A lot more problems in actually delivering it. But still, there are issues with these ships. There are. Now, one of the big issues I would point out are the guns. Simply put, there are issues. Why? Because one of the big problems for the Japanese in building up for war, apart from their own instinctual obsession with perfection of aviators, which meant that people who would have been considered fine additions to a fleet air arm or the US Naval aviation teams were dropped and excluded. Basically, they had a system focused on getting the top 1% rather than, we're going to accept the top 5-10%. And yeah, that's going to give us lower the average down, lower the sort of the quality level down a bit, maybe. But it's also going to give us a lot more people. Because let's be honest, on the bell curve of human distribution, let's say of piloting ability, let's say it does that, you know? Well, the top 1% are probably about here. I did it from this side. Yeah. If you're on a left to right axis, but you're looking at this and I haven't flipped this around, so your left is this one, which is also my right hand. No, that's... Yeah, okay. So, the top 1% is going to be a very small part of it. So if we do this being the axis, and like that, bell curve, right, the top 1% are like here, the top 5% are about here. There's a lot more people in that distribution. Lower it down to 10%, oh good lord, you can have so many pilots. And the thing is, some people become better with experience. Others provide you with a pool of pilots. That mean you can always load your carriers up with aircraft, and you can have a large enough pool of pilots and aircrew that you can rotate out your great pilots back. But the trouble is, again, Japanese doctrine didn't have that, because Japanese doctrine understood the reality of a war they were going to face was going to be short, because they couldn't fight a long war, so they had to make the very best efforts they could at the beginning. Now, if you're doing that, it makes sense to keep your best pilots at the front and have the very best pilots you can, because you want to make the best of it. Your first hit, and again, I'm afraid that quote, Japan can win the first battle for Japan, they can't win the second. Their doctrine is all around winning that first battle and hopefully getting peace, because they can't fight a second battle. And this is their problem, because they can win the first battle, but their opponents, they're going to be fighting, that would actually require them to fight multiple battles of that level, are in this scenario are either Britain or America, both of whom have humongous depths of infrastructure. The British Empire is colossal. America can build a lot of infrastructure. They already have quite a lot of infrastructure at this point. So they will come back for that second battle. So that also already means you should not be fighting them according to your doctrine. But, as said, sometimes the internal politics trumps it. Secondly, because you are trying to, with a limited infrastructure industry, ready yourself for war, it means you compromise on things. A good example is a Type 96 25mm AA gun. Because It's terrible! It truly is. It has reliability issues up the wazoo. Now, the Japanese felt it was their most reliable anti-aircraft weapon. But it was most effective when used at ranges of a kilometre or less, and that it would often require at least 1,500 rounds to shoot down an aircraft at a kilometre's sort of height and roughly 2 kilometers range. And that you can't use it against targets further away than that. And if you think about that, if you think about the roughly 1,500 rounds and the rate of fire, well, the rate of fire is 110 rounds per minute effectively. So, think about this. Even if you have a triple mount, that's 330 rounds per minute. You're still going to take nearly 5 minutes to put out your average of 1,500 rounds at a target. Is it going to take them 5 minutes to cross a distance of roughly 2 kilometers? 2,000 meters? Is it going to take them that long? We are... Well, we could be honest and say that's going to be roughly 2,200 yards or roughly 6,600 feet. How long is it going to take the aircraft to close that distance? Do you think you're going to have 5 minutes? It's not bad. They, 40 millimeters have a greater range. It's roughly the same amount of rounds, but it's a greater range. But the Japanese don't have the depth of infrastructure that they can correct these things. They don't have the depth of resources that they can correct these things. They have to make do. And this is also a product of their own limitations in terms of finances and what they could afford to do. So this also has to be a factor when considering about the ships and when they're designing these ships. These issues come about because of these limitations. Those limitations show up in other areas of these ships. As said, these are not the biggest, baddest, meanest carriers the Japanese could have built. And let's be honest, they are laid down in 1938. Okay, Shōkaku's December 1937, but that's pretty much close to 1938, and that's well after not just the treaty has not the second London Treaty has failed to be negotiated, but even after the extension and the escalator clause of the 1st of April 1937 has activated. So you are well into that period. And yet Japan is building ships which are in many ways not reflective of their doctrine and needs in that circumstance. They are building to the limitations of the space they have in Yokosuka Naval Arsenal and Kawasaki Kobe Shipyard. They're building to what they can build whilst also building other things they're prioritizing. Their service, unsurprisingly for such important carriers, both were lost in World War II. Shōkaku is lost in the Battle of the Philippine Seas, along with Taiho. Zukaku is lost in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. At that time, she had an air group of 28 Zero fighters, 16 Zero fighter bombers, 7 D4Y reconnaissance aircraft, and 15 of the B-6N Jill torpedo bombers. So not exactly the world's largest air group. 15 of the B6 of the Jill torpedo bombs. Sorry, I think I said 16, but it's honestly depressing seeing how far they've fallen, seeing how far they've dropped at that point, because when you think about what she'd started out with, what she could carry, and by this point she's down to 66 airframes aboard her. Not 72, which was her full operating capacity, not 84, her full stowed capacity, 66. In simple terms, by the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Shōkaku, the last remaining of the class, is down to an air group the size of a Kagi's operational strength. And that's as much because of a shortage of pilots and a shortage of aircrew as it is a shortage of aircraft. And the real problem for the Japanese in terms of their design is that these carriers work very well when they have a full air group. They work very well, which they were designed to after all. Their whole thing was having the aircraft in reserve so they could maintain their full air group. They don't work well when you don't have a full air group. They don't work well despite you having upgraded the number of fighters to 28 and having 16 fighter bombers. And the A6M5s and the A6M2s, they're great additions. It does give you theoretically a fighter strength of 44 aircraft, which is useful, let's be honest. But that's still not the same as 2 flight decks, 6 elevators supporting 36 aircraft. Or multiple flight decks supporting, with even more cumulative, more elevators supporting a whole lot more fighter aircraft. And the Japanese, especially as radar wasn't really widespread. The problem with radar was never developing it. The Japanese had some interesting radar capabilities. It was deploying it. So despite the fact that Shōkaku has radar which saves her at the Battle of Santa Cruz Island by giving a warning of when the American strike's coming in so she can put her aircraft and not be caught in the same situation as other Japanese carriers were. And Shōkaku has radar as well, and it saves her on occasions. It's not just having the radar on the carrier which allows you to defend your carrier. As the British would testify to in the Mediterranean and other operations, yes, a lot of their carriers always had radar. But the real thing is the picket, destroyers and cruisers having radar as well, to just give you that bit of extra warning. So your radar is not serving as your early warning radar, it's serving as your queuing radar that allows you to focus where your air defense fighters you're coordinating with can go. You've already been told there is something coming from something which is slightly further out than your radar is. And that's the problem for the Japanese. It's not developing the things, it's turning them from ideas and bespoke systems to mass-produced items. This affects both their service. It truly does. And then if you consider the fact that it's after the Battle of the Coral Sea, they are not at Midway because they have to go home to replenish their air groups. Again, because as discussed earlier, the Japanese have real issues when it comes to their air group generation because of how picky they are over pilots. They have truly colossal issues with air group generation. And this is, again, something which is not unknown to the Japanese. They'd realised it themselves. It's just getting the system to change. Which leads us to a conclusion about these carriers and their value. They are useful ships. They are very, very useful ships. And This picture itself is purported to show Shōkaku and Kaga preparing for their attack on Pearl Harbor in December 7th, 1941. Now, which is the thing that defines them in many ways. It makes them targets for the Americans. It's also their appearance which sets a timeline for this battle. So it defines them, but what realistically defines their construction and their conception is the doctrine. And again, what are they for? What part of the doctrine are they for? Well, realistically, they're supposed to slot into all of it. And you cannot say a vessel with these characteristics is not a great fit for Ugeki Sangen Sankazen. Ugeki Zingen Sankazen. I said Sangen. It's Ugeki Zingen Sankazen. You cannot say it's not a great fit for that. But that's not also what defined their construction. And again, Taikan Kiyoshugi has to come in, and even Kantai Gessen. For a decisive battle, they are able to deliver a decisive strike. For attrition operations, they are able to keep up a rolling attrition with their aircraft. They are able to sustain their air group through losses, limited losses, but still sustain their air group through losses, to mount a complete strike and to mount a full-strength strike. And they're able to maintain their defense to stop themselves being attrited as long as they have enough fighters and are able to coordinate with other carriers. That all is good. But it's not enough. It's not enough. You see, carriers aren't just a reflection of doctrine. You have to see how they're used. And I think this is consistently, for me, where the Japanese fall down. Their doctrines, a lot of their doctrines are about appearing strong. You cannot appear strong if the enemy do not know you. And I think on appearing strong, these carriers fail on two grounds. One, they are not publicized nearly enough, and two, they're just not big enough. And that seems terrible to say. But think about it. What Japan really needed was the aircraft carrier equivalent of the Yamato class. That's what they needed. They needed the aircraft. They needed these to be the aircraft carrier equivalent of the Yamato class. They needed to be bigger, more powerful than anyone else's carriers. Now, admittedly, Yamatos are slow. They're not fast battleships. They're capable of 27 knots, not 28 knots. And by the way, before anyone starts thinking this is me artificially putting in a designation requirement to become a fast battleship, no. It's defined as they have to have the speed to keep up with cruisers. And the cruising speed is still at this point stuck at 28 knots. So that's where it comes from. Battle cruisers are supposed to be faster. Fast battleships, as long as they can do 28 knots, they're fast battleships. If they can't do 28 knots, they're not fast battleships. It's where the line is. The line has to be drawn somewhere, because otherwise, this is the point, you say, right then, so actually no, we're going to make it 27 knots because that ship could do 27 knots, and honestly it's only a knot difference. And then someone goes, well, what about these ships, which we think could have done 26 knots? Are they now fast battleships? It's only a knot difference. Well, yeah, but that's 2 knots below. Yeah, but you dropped it to 27 knots, so, you know, surely it's 26 knots. And then you find yourself going down lower and lower and lower until someone's telling you that Nelson and Rodney are fast battleships. It doesn't work. You have to try it. You set the definition somewhere, and you have to stick to it. These are large fleet carriers. They are fast fleet carriers. They are capable fleet carriers. They are fully rounded carriers in the 1920s, 30s vernacular of aircraft carriers. What do they need to be? Bigger. They needed to be true equivalents to the Lexington class in size. They needed to be colossal. And they need to be publicized about it. These ships should not have been aiming for having 18, 27, 27. They should have been aiming for 36, 36, 36. With a decent enough reserve. Because let's be honest, 30, that takes you to 108. So 12 aircraft reserve is 120 aircraft capacity, which isn't great, and 12 reserve aircraft to support that, that's not a lot of aircraft. Maybe 22 aircraft reserve. Then you can have 7, 7, and 8. And I probably want 8 reserve fighters, and 7 reserve dive bombers, and 7 reserve torpedo bombers. They needed that. They needed to be mahusive to fulfill their doctrine requirements, and also to be able to be used to deter conflict. Because if you are pursuing a quality strategy as your ability to deter, they have to have so much abundant quality that they do count mentally in terms of the enemy's military approach to something, in terms of their fire, and then, as something more than they are. The Japanese go with that with the 18-inch guns for the Yamatos. That's what they're going for. That's why they're going for those 18-inch guns. There is no other good reason to pick 18-inch over 16-inch guns. Especially when you consider the complexity of actually delivering them, and the sheer weight of armor, etc., and all those things which go into it. You could honestly, on the Yamato's size hull, have got a 12, 16-inch gun ship into service a lot quicker, a lot easier, because you've already got a very decent 16-inch gun to work from as the basis of your development. You've got decent shells, you've got all those in stock. You do not need to do this. Admittedly, their 18-inch gun program had been going since the 1920s. Probably earlier. We know that because they keep having designs which are 18-inch gun battleships, and they've got an ongoing program. But the fact is, the good argument for the 18-inch gun, for going for such the bigger guns, for going for these things, is the status it gives your ship. Especially in contrast to the older ships which are in service. If the Japanese had pushed through something which was the same size in standard as the Lexington class conversion carriers, those ships would have been colossally capable aircraft carriers, could have had more armor, more speed, and could have been such statements. But again, your doctrine, your vision, is bumping up against your reality of the infrastructure you have available, of how much resources you have, how many resources you have available, what resources you have available. And so this is why these ships are compromises. Why Yamatos are compromises. Every ship design ever built has always been a compromise between your dream and the reality. And some things you can push, some things you can edge, and others you have to concede on. And some things you have to completely renege on in order to get those things that you can push and edge through. It's the compromise which teaches us what is important in a nation's doctrine when they're building ships. It's always the compromise which teaches us. And so, today's video question, think I've already discussed some of the compromises in this design. And I want you to think about the doctrines that led to the development of ships. So you can pick any ship you want. And look at where the compromises are. And then tell me, please, right below, as I always finish these videos with a question, what you think those compromises tell you about the Navy's own value, their Navy's own view on their doctrine and what they valued. And it's, by the way, it's the same for aircraft, it's the same for armoured vehicles. Every single time you will have a doctrine that will be behind the creation of X, Y, or Z, whatever it is, or the selection of a rifle. And then when you look at the rifle, you go, well, it's supposed to be reflecting this doctrine. It won't perfectly reflect that doctrine. The compromises tell you what matters in that doctrine to the Navy, or the Army, or the Air Force, which is implementing it. And those compromises are probably going to be forced by cost, but there are going to be some things those services are going to concede on, and some things they are prepared to concede on in order to get what they want. Now, I have something to announce. Scandi ship! Scandi flick. Ship shape trip. So, right, and I'm going to give you my précis of this. We've had a nightmare 12 months since Australia. I have had my mum be ill a couple of occasions. Some of you might remember prior to Christmas she had a severe bout of something, which was... It's actually quite an embarrassing thing to actually have. You're not supposed to get it in developed countries. It's not supposed to be something that happens, but it had been some of her issues had been left for so long and ignored for so long. She actually ended up being hospitalized with them when normally they're treated outpatients, antibiotics, for a couple of days. And that's all been sorted, and so, but that's left to other ongoing health issues, which are being, they're not ongoing, but they are ongoing in that they're still being looked after and sorted out. And that came when we had just decided to move house. And we're starting all the proceedings for moving house. And on top of that, I've had 3 university contracts ended. One of them, 2 of them expected to end, and they weren't renewed because they're reducing the size of the departments. Interesting enough, both are now currently back in contact with me going, would you like to come in for one-off teaching and this, that, and the other, but we'll leave that to one side. And one decided that they wanted me to go and try and carry on doing the post which I'd been doing online by sitting in the middle of the lunch hall, dining room, and trying to do individual one-to-one sessions with students on a table there. When I said I didn't think that was viable, it was a case of come in or we won't, come in, do it, or we won't pay you. And I was a case of, right, I won't do it. Because one-to-one, this is going to sound picky, but if you've got a student bringing their essay, and they want you to work it through with them, doing it in the middle of a lunchroom is not conducive to doing that. There is no point in me wasting my time doing it or the student wasting their time trying to do it, because there's going to be too much distraction going on. I don't need a special silent, quiet office, but I do need somewhere where I could do it in a reasonable degree of, not so much privacy, but control over the atmosphere, if that makes sense. So there's not distractions. On top of that, my sister has moved jobs and has also had some fun illnesses, and we've had some fun with the dogs and illnesses. I've also been juggling about 24 other projects going on, etc. This has led to all sorts of things. Bilge pumps has been paused because of that. It's coming back soon, but it's been paused because we were so busy and so busy sorting things out. And this all built up, and this was just me. Then you add on, Drac had his own things. And of course, Her Highness, Princess Draconophelia, has now joined us. And all those projects are going on. And then we've had Garius, basically ended up running a football club. A football club which had flooded and had all sorts of other issues. And it's not a small football club either. It's a big one. Okay, they are a wonderful football team. And Dan has been, the poor guy has been overworked beyond belief. So yeah, we dropped some balls. Quite literally. But we've got everything organised now. We've got Mrs. Draconopher, the friendly sea mine herself, has come and is now taking over some of the admin and sorting things out. We have finally got, as I've taught us around 20 times, the right shade of iron brew coloured challenge coins. We've got them. And so we are doing something incredibly cheeky. There is a link down below in the description. We're doing the Scandi ship trip. We're doing Scandinavia. And theoretically, we are supposed to be flying out on the 14th of June. So we have days to fundraise this realistically, because A, we need to book the stuff up. And for someone like me going on this trip, and a couple of others of us on going on this trip, some of us do have space on our credit cards. Happy days. Some, like me, in the middle of moving house, as I've said on many videos, I'm currently brassic. I should not be doing this. And I have also had the conversation with the team of, if we can't fundraise enough for me to go, then don't worry, it'll all be organised, and I just won't be able to go. Life happens, and this is the way it's shook out. Everything's shook out this way. I'd love to go. I want to go. I've planned it all. I've talked to all the museums and organised all that. And now we've announced officially and we're fundraising for it. I can go back to those museums and go, we've penciled in dates. I'd like to ink those in now. I'd like to ink in that we're going to be in Narvik from the 16th of June to the 19th of June. I'd like to ink in that we're going to be in Karlskoga about the 20th and 21st of June. I'd like to ink in that we're going to be in Gothenburg from the 22nd to the 25th of June. I'd like to ink in that we are going to be in Karlskrona on the 26th and 27th of June. I'd like to ink in that from about the 27th to the 2nd, 27th of June to the 2nd of July, we're going to be in Stockholm. I'd like to ink in that we're going to be in Helsinki from the 2nd of July to the 7th of July. I'd like to ink that all in. And you will be seeing very soon, hopefully, as I get things back and details back, you will see a populated list of where we're going to be and where we are going to be hopefully having events where people can come and meet us and we can have fun and see you all and chat naval history with you and just have a lot of fun in Scandinavia, looking at all the wonderful naval history there. I've written a little bit about the gunboat war, etc., on the that's on the website, and we're going to be taking another Dan with us, Dan the chemist, who we are still looking for a cool name for. Dan the chemist. What's he going to be called? What is his catchline going to be? Because I'm Dr. Alex. I live with that. I'm happy with that. I kind of created that for myself, I have to admit, because I decided to say it to make my life very easily and make universities not be able to go, are you hiding your YouTube profile because it's got a different name than your official name, and just go, This is my professional title and working a professional name, and everything will be the same. All my social media, everything that is public, will be Dr. Alexander Clarke. Boom, done. It also saves me having to remember it. I can just go, just search Dr. Alexander Clarke, and people will find me. It just makes my life easier. It's fun. But all that, you know, I've got that. Dr. Dan is Dr. Dan, the medical guy, the medical man. But that's the medical doctor. And then Thrak and Garrus the Brit, you know, they've got their names. Dan the chemist. Currently, he's being called Dan the chemist, and I don't think the chemist is a good enough name for him. So yes, the link is below. We don't have to raise anywhere near as much money as we did for Australia. I think, including car rental, which is extortionate. For all 5 of us, I think it's roughly, and car rental, I think it's no more. It's about 18 grand overall. We are fundraising. It might even be less than that, because we are still playing around some of the sums, and as those of us who can book do book, we get firmer figures. But also, as it gets closer to time, it gets more expensive. So that's the joy of life. But this is the thing. This is what we're fundraising. So all the details are explained. All the stuff should be going back. There is also a very nice apology from Garrus. And yeah, Scandi ship. It should be fun. It should be really good, and there is a link to it down below. What else have we got coming on? Well, next week I've got Carriers of the Warfleet, which I think I've already recorded and put up. I might re-record that before it goes live, but I'm basically all of June and July will be pre-recorded so that they are done. So while I'm moving house, because theoretically, the 4th to 11th, these 2 weeks of 2 weeks, I'll be moving house at some point in that period. And then for the 18th, 25th, and 2nd, and I think I get home. I think I get back on the the 9th is the first day I am back. From 9th, I fly home late on the 8th, so the first full day I'm back is the 9th. Yeah, I'm away, and then I'm probably apologizing to my family and helping them with the ongoing thing that is moving in. And then once we're moved in, of course, we're going to be doing all the building work, because the whole plan of doing the building work before they move in has been mucked up by all the delays. Oh, goodness gracious me, I am going through 2 months of... yeah, if I make it to War Experience Carriers without having a minor... how do I put this politely? Crying jag in front of you all, I'll be surprised. I haven't cried in years, though, but it would be... I'll be surprised. And hopefully, and there will be lives the whole way through in terms of brew ships, but it's going to be premieres for the Thursdays just to give me that much time, because whilst I try to be on Discord, etc., it gives me just that much more time if their premieres are in the case. So yeah, they should all be scheduled. All Thursday premieres should be up soon. Oh, why do I do this to myself? Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you like the videos, please do like, share, and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. And if you want to support the book addiction, which keeps this channel going, and if you want to support the Iron Brew addiction that keeps this channel going, then there's Patreon, Ko-fi, and memberships of the channel. All really do help. And all literally do... Well, the Ko-fi stuff literally goes to Iron Brew. It's literally phrased as, do you want to buy a couple of bottles of Iron Brew for me? For Dr. Alex? Please do. Because that literally is the price of 2 bottles of Iron Brew. That is what I have the Ko-fi set as. 2 bottles of Iron Brew. That'll keep me going for about 2 days. And then with all the stuff I'm doing. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, and take care.